When you think of exciting events in American history, one of the last places you think of is Orange County, California. Known mostly today for our beaches, our sprawling 1950s suburbs, Disneyland, theme parks, traffic, affluent neighborhoods, maybe some wineries. Most of the people's families in this part of the country got here in the 1950s and on. And so even the people who grew up here, when they think of American history, they're thinking about the East Coast, Boston Harbor, Plymouth Rock, Philadelphia, and the signing of the Declaration of Independence 250 years ago this year. But history lives here as well, because in 1776, the same year the United States of America was being founded by the Declaration of Independence, Spanish missionaries founded this Mission San Juan Capistrano. Now, many people have heard of the California mission. Spain was expanding its empire up from Mexico along the west coast, spreading their Roman Catholic faith with little mission outposts like this, which weren't just about faith, but also ranching, farming, and settling this part of America, bringing civilization to the wilderness, not a very popular historical subject these days. And so most of the old Spanish missions that have been preserved are sort of turned into beautiful gardens, little historic sites where we learn about the padres who were out here preaching to the Native American inhabitants, or some people would say forcing them into labor, wedging them into the plot line of Western history and Western civilization. But that's mostly what Mission San Juan Capistrano is known for these days in 2026. A beautiful garden, a nice place to take wedding photos, a little dip into the Catholic past on the West Coast. And of course, if you're into that thing, in the surrounding neighborhoods, all kinds of fancy restaurants, little boutiques, little bougie shops. But there was one very exciting event right here in Orange County, California, right here at Mission San Juan Capistrano, that for some reason almost no one ever talks about. This place right where I'm standing in Orange County, California, in San Juan Capistrano, was once raided by pirates. And normally when you think of pirates, Orange County is the last place that comes to mind, unless you're thinking about Disneyland and the Pirates of the Caribbean. Pirates of the Caribbean, right? You think of them being far away on the other side of the country. But on December 15th, 1818, this was in fact the site of raiding, pillaging, robbing, burning, shooting, looting, and even a little bit of death. All caused by a multinational force of tall ship riding, raiding, invading pirates. And normally when you think of pirates, you think of somebody flying the Jolly Roger, or maybe flying the flag of England or Spain or France. But the pirates who attacked San Juan Capistrano in 1818 were attacking it under the flag of Argentina. And they weren't just doing it in the name of plunder and spoils and booty, but in the name of revolution. It's a little bit of a complex story, and like most things, you can sort of blame it on the French, because the captain of the pirate ship that attacked the Mission San Juan Capistrano, was a man by the name of Hippolyte Bouchard. Bouchard was born sometime around 1780 in southern France, about 9 years before the Revolution, 13 years before King Louis XVI lost his head to the guillotine. He was coming of age right when France was thrown into wave after wave after wave of revolution, political turmoil, chaos, upheaval. People were losing faith in the ancien regime, right? The old school way of doing things, the monarchy, the church. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte took power over France, and by that time, Bouchard was probably already in the French Navy, fighting the British. These guys were facing death, destruction, mayhem, and uncertainty on a daily basis. During this time, many historians would say the French Navy was being run rather incompetently from the top down. They were having a lot of problems with funding and distribution, which means getting their guys paid, fed, and watered. And at the same time, the spirit of revolution that had started in America, spread to France, was now spreading all over the world. The old order was under attack everywhere. Now, what does this have to do with Orange County? I'm getting there. We're almost there. By 1808, having caused all kinds of chaos all over Europe, Napoleon had invaded Spain, deposed their king. For the sake of simplicity, let's just say replace him with one of their own guys, throwing the Spanish Empire into chaos. Spain had colonies and settlements all over the world. Some of them followed the new king set up by Napoleon. Some of them refused to submit and wanted to stay loyal to the old kings, the old line. But for many of the colonies, this was a chance to throw off the shackles of old Spain and claim independence. And also for a lot of rich and powerful men to take advantage of the chaos and set themselves up in the name of either revolution or standing by the old king. You get the idea. Now, Spanish Mexico and Spanish California did not revolt. They were here biding their time, trying to be loyal and good. But in May of 1810, Argentina went into full-on revolution. The Buenos Aires elites removed the Spanish viceroy, claiming to rule in the name of the Spanish king, and then pivoting towards just out-and-out revolution. This is Argentina, right? Not a lot of soldiers or professional soldiers and Navy men in Argentina, and to fight Spain and to throw off their shackles, you're gonna need a Navy. So Argentina puts out the word throughout all the world that they are looking for professional soldiers, for Navy guys, for anybody who knows anything about war. There was actually an Irishman named William Brown that they recruited to form the Argentine Navy. He starts putting out the word to agents all over the world, finding dissatisfied soldiers and sailors fed up with the European wars, looking for a military opportunity for advancement, right? Some armies that they could join where they could advance quicker and make their name and fortune a heck of a lot faster than they could in Europe. And that is how the French, Hippolyte, which looks like Hippolyte if you spell it in American, that is how Hippolyte Bouchard ends up joining the Argentinian Navy. He's working for the Argentinians when in 1816 they finally declare full independence, and in 1817 he's given a ship, a frigate called La Argentina, and he's also handed letters of marque, basically legal documents allowing him to wage a one-man war against the Spanish wherever he finds them, anywhere around the world, and that's exactly what Bouchard does. He heads east across the Atlantic Ocean, around the bottom of Africa, up towards Madagascar, into the Indian Ocean, the Philippines, and Southeast Asia, harassing the Spanish anywhere and everywhere he can, taking as much loot and booty as he can, eventually commanding a crew of more than 200 people from all over the globe. We're talking about Europe, we're talking about South America, the Indian Ocean, Africa. He had Indonesians, and eventually in 1818, when he got to the Sandwich Islands, as they were known then, he picked up native Hawaiian sailors as well. And that's not all he picked up in Hawaii. It turns out there was another Argentinian ship there that had mutinied. He found the mutineers, pardoned some of them, flogged others, hires an English pilot and navigator, a sailor by the name of Peter Corney, who was familiar with the California coast, to run his second ship, which was called the Santa Rosa. And they set sail from Hawaii to the west coast of America and Spanish California. Now, after stopping to get supplies from the Russians further up the coast, their first stop to harass and cause chaos among the Spanish was none other than the Spanish capital of California, Monterey. On November 20th, 1818, Bouchard's two ships show up in the bay and begin a bombardment against the Presidio, the Spanish fort there, but by the next day, they send their soldiers onto dry land to attack the fort, to attack the town, and not only do they take it and loot it, hey, they end up burning Monterey to the ground. Now, this is a big deal, as you can imagine. This throws the Spanish in California into absolute chaos and panic, which of course is the whole point. What Bouchard wanted to do was show the Californios, the people living in California, that Spain could not protect them, right? He wanted to stir them up against Spain itself and hopefully convince and demonstrate to everybody from Argentina all the way up to Alta California that it was better to throw off their old governments, become revolutionaries, become independent, and therefore become trading partners of the new Argentina. I'm simplifying the story here a little bit, but you get the idea. Now, the Spanish were indeed pretty weak in California in the sense that there were very few of them and they were very widely dispersed. They did, of course, have the mission system going up and down the California coast, and some of them in sort of the inland regions, but not every mission, not even every other mission, had a garrison of soldiers or a presidio nearby, or even a sizable town. A lot of the Spanish population was distributed all over what is the modern state of California, ranching and farming and distributed in far-flung, tiny little settlements. All told, there were about 3,000 Spanish Californians in 1818. But like I said, that is spread out across the entire state. So when Bouchard shows up with 300 armed men on two ships, you're talking about a fighting force about 10% of the size of the Spanish population of all of California. Now, of course, that does not include the Native Americans, But they're in various states of loyalty, right? Some of them don't like the Spanish very much at all. Others like the Spanish. They're learning from the Padres. They want to become good Christians, good Catholics. But they don't know anything about warfare, especially warfare with 19th century technology, with cannons, with giant ships, with muskets, with armor. So when you put it into perspective like that, this would be like an army of hundreds of thousands of people landing in Sacramento and absolutely ravaging our capital. The Spanish were panicked. Now, they did have soldiers. They could outnumber Bouchard's force, but they needed time to go and gather everybody together. And meanwhile, La Argentina and the Santa Rosa, Bouchard ships, are going down the coast. They don't know where they're gonna land and where they're going to attack next. It also hadn't been quite as easy for Bouchard to take Monterey as he figured it would, right? He's got a very small force. He can't afford to lose very many men, and he did lose a few up in Monterey. So as he's coming down the coast, he's thinking, all right, I don't want to attack any more towns with presidios, with garrisons of soldiers and with cannons in them, right? So they skirt down, passing Santa Cruz. I guess they figure Santa Cruz was a little too well defended, and instead raids a much less well defended rancho just north of Santa Barbara, California. Now the word is spreading, by the way. The Spanish are spreading the word down the coast that Bouchard and his men are coming. So when they get to this ranch up there, there's basically nobody left. So Bouchard's men do what pirates do. They're looting the ranch, they're roaming around looking for supplies, looking for livestock, when a couple of them were captured by the very few Spanish soldiers in the area. We're talking like 3 or 4 guys. Bouchard goes down to Santa Barbara, anchors in the harbor, and demands his men back. Again, I'm simplifying the story, but basically the Spanish in Santa Barbara go, all right, we're gonna give you your men back. We're gonna exchange them for the one prisoner of ours. In exchange, you've got to promise no more looting, burning, or pillaging down Spanish California's coast. According to the Spanish, Bouchard agrees to this. He gets his men back, and he continues his cruise. Now, the Spanish don't trust Bouchard. He's a freaking pirate from their perspective. They know he's gonna keep pillaging and raiding and taking supplies. And so they basically sent orders all down the California coast to all of the different missions, including this one, San Juan Capistrano. But the Padres and the local populations of the mission settlements should take anything valuable and basically flee inland, to inland missions, flee for the hills, whatever it takes, but evacuate any settlements close to the coast. And this is where the story starts to affect Orange County and Mission San Juan Capistrano in particular. Now, it's an annoying truth, an annoying reality, but it is a reality that many things are gonna lie outside the scope of this video, and we're gonna have to simplify a lot of history here. But to give you the mission basics, like I said, this place was established as we know it today in November of 1776 by Father Junipero Serra, who is now, by the way, known as Saint Serra, if you're a Catholic, and became a major part of the California mission system located between Los Angeles and San Diego. And the Spanish mission system in California really had 3 purposes: to convert the Native American population to Christianity or Roman Catholicism, to secure Spanish territorial claims in Alta California and prevent any other empires or kingdoms from establishing control over this territory. And then, of course, there was the financial side. They were hoping to create agricultural communities here surrounding the missions at first that would then become independent, creating economic opportunities out here, business opportunities, and then luring more settlers. So basically, eventually, to make a whole lot of money for the Spanish Empire. Now, was this a good mix, mixing government control with faith, with the economy? Probably not. I think most people today would kind of frown on that mixture, but that was the reality in the 18th and early 19th centuries. Clearly, the fathers that were out here, the Padres, the missionaries, took their work very seriously. I mean, look at the stone church that they built here in San Juan Capistrano. It's absolutely massive. The workmanship is pretty impressive, especially considering that the Spanish relied heavily on local Native American labor, the Achachiman people, or as the Padres called them, the Juanino Indians. I mean, this is one heck of a temple right here. They were taking the faith pretty seriously, but the Spanish governors and entrepreneurs, they were very much interested in the financial side. Again, a weird mix, or we would consider it so today, but that was the reality. So besides the spiritual endeavors, the spiritual purpose of the mission, they had all the Native Americans out here farming and growing crops, raising horses and livestock, and probably the biggest thing, economically speaking, was cattle. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of cattle grazing for miles and miles around these missions. But they also had things like vineyards to produce wine. They had olive trees to make olive oil. Basically anything and everything you needed to plant civilization along the Pacific coast over here. All right, now speaking of the Native American population of San Juan Capistrano, and this is the important part, the Padres here were in charge of 1,000 Ahachiman people, or Juanino Indians as they would have called them then. 1,000 neophytes or converts to the faith. And again, we don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty, the right and wrong of it all, but basically the idea was they would convert a Native American, they would join voluntarily the mission system, they live here and work here for about 10 years with no option to leave, become thoroughly quote-unquote civilized, and then join or assimilate into the sort of European population here. Now in practice, although that worked a little bit, it never really worked out the way the Spanish intended. But again, that's beyond the scope of this particular episode. The important part is that there were about 1,000 Native Americans living in and around the mission that were part of the mission itself. And then in terms of the Spanish or the Europeans at the mission, there was a handful of soldiers that were never all here at any given time. Maybe 10 guys tops spread throughout the region who theoretically lived here at the mission in some barracks that I'll show you in a little while. And then maybe 25 to 30 civilians working for, in, or around the mission who built up their own little properties and houses outside the mission walls. In the town out here, which is now the Los Ríos Historic District and sort of the plaza in front of the mission, at the time we're talking about in pretty simple adobe buildings with wooden roofs, or even in some cases some very simple wooden buildings. And then of course you had two padres here, two fathers, two priests, Jose Barona and Geronimo Boscana. Now it should go without saying, but I'm gonna say it anyways, that the native population of the mission system was not allowed to be armed. And we're talking about a generation or so after the establishment of the mission, in some cases maybe even 2 or 3 generations down the line. So the Ahachiman here were not armed. So when you take into account that the priests were not going to fight any battles, the total population of the town, men, women, and children, was about 30 people, and the native population was neither equipped nor trained to do any fighting. You're talking about maybe a total possible defense force of about 10 or 15 guys from the mission itself, which is pretty much nothing against the more than 300 guys Bouchard had in his combined 2 ships. Now, one of the first buildings you see when you enter the mission from the south side is this right here. This would have been the barracks for the soldiers here at San Juan Capistrano. I've always known that, but I always assumed that meant there were 20, 30, 40 soldiers, not 10 at the most. Some of the sources I've seen while I was researching this video say maybe 3 or 4 soldiers at any given time. And when we actually enter the barracks building today, you can see some depictions of what those soldiers would have looked like. They were leather jacket soldiers, meaning they were wearing leather armor, not that metal conquistador stuff that we think of when we're thinking of the Spanish. Soldado de cuera. Leather jacket soldiers. As you can see, they lived pretty simply in here. This is not a very big chamber, although like I said, I thought maybe 30 or 40 guys lived in here because you have room for plenty of bunks, but I guess at the time, there were not that many soldiers dedicated to this particular mission. So you would think that if there was even the remotest possibility of troops of hundreds of men coming to overtake or raid the mission, that the Padres would have been pretty nervous. Apparently though, and maybe it was due to their faith in the Almighty, the Padres did not immediately evacuate the premises, even though the Spanish authorities after the incident in Monterrey pretty much ordered everyone to evacuate. Father Barona and Father Boscana did not seem too concerned. By the way, the sort of south wing of the mission facing the mission entrance today is the wing in which the Padres lived. Now what they were ordered to do is gather up all the valuables at the mission and take everybody and evacuate across the hills to an inland mission called San Antonio de la Pala. Forgive the pronunciation, Baxter, you know I don't speak Spanish. But whether it was faith or foolishness, the Padres did not do that. For one thing, it would have been 40 or 50 miles over the hills, so quite an ordeal. And they didn't know for sure Bouchard was going to land here. After all, there were plenty of other Spanish settlements that he skipped right over. So the Padres here decided to bide their time. By the way, this is their dormitorio. This is where they actually slept, in this very room in the mission. So you can imagine then, in the beginning of December 1818, the Padres in this very room, or in these very rooms, discussing the question of the raiding and invading pirates and what they were going to do, perhaps pondering the question over a meal in this very room. At any rate, what they decided to do was to wait and see. And honestly, you can't really blame them, because from their perspective, this place was the middle of nowhere. They weren't exactly dealing with rivers of gold and silver out here. The warehouses next to the Padres' quarters were packed with things like wheat, barley, corn, peas, lentils, rendered fats of tallow, dried and salted beef, and of course, because they had so many cattle, probably piles and piles of cowhide and leather, which I believe they tanned right here on the backside of the old mission warehouses that, as you can see, have been reconstructed over the years. Although there's quite a few pieces of original adobe left, scattered around. You had a little bit of wine stored out here, a little bit of brandy, like I said, a little bit of leather, but mostly just livestock and corn. Food. So like I say, if you're the priests in charge of 1,000 people here, or controlling 1,000 people here, as some would put it, with a fighting force of maybe 10, maybe 15 guys total, if you include the civilian men around here, running away 50 miles to the hills for no reason seemed pretty foolhardy. So you can see why the Padres decided to stay here to wait and to see, especially as they figured, well, there's plenty of other land we can run to in the local area, but we'll get back to that later. Meanwhile, while the Padres at the mission down here and the local townsfolk of San Juan Capistrano were deciding whether or not to take this threat of pirates seriously, Bouchard and his men weren't just laying around, right? They were creeping their way down the California coast, getting closer and closer to Orange County. And by this point, they were not the happiest people in the world. Bouchard had made his strongest point attacking Monterey, but rather than finding the citizens, or the Indians as they would have called them then, ready to rise up in revolt against the Spanish, they just kept meeting pesky resistance. Not only that, but they weren't exactly finding rivers of gold when they were pillaging and plundering. They were finding fresh food, fresh supplies, water, a little bit of livestock here and there, but hardly enough to keep a pirate crew satisfied. So Bouchard was definitely not done raiding along the California coast. He needed to at least make one more strike. Now, as they got near Los Angeles, there was a pretty big population, relatively speaking, in the area. We, of course, had Mission San Gabriel, one of the wealthier and well-populated mission areas. But there were just too many Spanish residents there and too many soldiers to make the effort worth it. And yet between, almost exactly between, Mission San Gabriel and the very well-defended and populated, again, relatively speaking, settlement of San Diego, they had planted this mission here, Mission San Juan Capistrano. While the Padres were waffling on whether or not to evacuate everybody from the mission, Bouchard and his men were calculating that it would be the perfect target. Now today, Mission San Juan Capistrano doesn't seem that close to the beach. There's a whole bunch of buildup, so many neighborhoods and businesses and Costco's, and even, of course, the 5 freeway. But Bouchard's men knew that San Juan Capistrano, the mission, the fertile fields, were up that way, with just 3 miles of a pretty well-established road along the creek system between the mission and the ocean. Remember, Bouchard had a lot of men that were familiar with this coastline. Not only that, but down here where San Juan Creek empties into the Pacific Ocean near Dana Point, this area had a pretty zesty reputation for smuggling and illegal trade when it came to ships landing here in Orange County and then, you know, transferring cargo. Not only did these pirates know that the mission was not all that well defended and just 3 miles inland from the coast, they also knew there was safe anchorage for them here in San Juan Bay, which today, of course, is known as Dana Point. Actually, I believe Dana Point technically refers to the highlands behind me. Those hills just barely visible in the distance, those cliffs poking out into the ocean. And on December 14th, 1818, although some sources differ on the date, Bouchard with La Argentina and the Santa Rosa rounded what we now call Dana Point and anchored here in San Juan Bay, just at the mouth of San Juan Creek. Now, the Spanish weren't idle this whole time. They knew that Mission San Juan Capistrano, this area, was a pretty soft target. So the Comandante down in San Diego, Comandante Francisco Ruiz, split up his meager forces down in the San Diego Presidio and sent 30 soldiers to help with the defense of San Juan Capistrano up here under a guy named Santiago Arguello. He, of course, met up with the Padres at the mission and then set a watch on the bay here on the harbor to keep a lookout for Bouchard and the pirates. And the landscape has been radically transformed. Everything's been bulldozed, the land has been extended, the beach has been changed. But the mouth of San Juan Creek still empties here into the old San Juan Bay. The highlands of Dana Point are off here behind me. You can see why coming around that point and anchoring in this bay, this was the safest harbor around. And not only that, the mouth of San Juan Creek back then would have been a highly visible sign they were in the right place. And this indeed was the way up to the mission. Not only that, but they had a bunch of pirates on board who, as I said, were very familiar with this area already due to some of the local rumors of smuggling. Now, by this point, Arguello and his men, they knew the pirates were coming. They had been spotted cruising down the coast of what became Los Angeles and then North Orange County. And on December 14th, let's just stick with that date for now. This is where they saw them anchor La Argentina and the Santa Rosa. And as Bouchard's men rowed ashore in their smaller boats, Arguello came down to the beach to meet them, or sent someone to meet them, to see what exactly their demands were. They didn't immediately threaten Arguello or his men, or threaten to burn down the town or sack the mission or anything, but apparently they did pretty forcefully demand whatever food and provisions they had to be completely resupplied in their ships before they went on their merry way, which sounds like a pretty good deal. I mean, if I was in Arguello's shoes with maybe 30 guys against 300 or so out on those ships, not to mention cannons and everything else, I'd probably be like, all right, we'll get you some food and water and you guys can take off. But apparently Arguello had a different response in mind. And according to Peter Corney, at least, who was in charge of the Santa Rosa, as well as a few other Spanish sources, Arguello said, oh yeah, we'll resupply you. We'll give you a supply of powder and shot. Or in today's terms, yeah, eat lead. It's a pretty sassy reply, pretty bold indeed. And apparently, when the men got back to the ship and told Bouchard, as Peter Corney puts it, the Commodore was very much incensed at this answer. In other words, this really ticked the pirates off, as you can imagine. I mean, even riding out at anchor a distance from the shore, Bouchard and his men could easily see that Arguello only had like 30 guys with him, and only some of those mounted on horseback. He knew that this was a bluff, and probably a stupid one. And that is when he and his council of war decided that the mission indeed would be a target. All right, so clearly now, things were getting pretty serious. Arguello had issued his threat and offered to give the pirates a little taste of powder and shot. And while his small force of 30 guys probably mostly stayed down by the beach to keep an eye on the ships, they undoubtedly sent riders back up here, back up Camino Capistrano to the mission to give warning that the pirates had in fact landed and Arguello had issued threats. Now let's not forget, this is 3 weeks after the sacking of Monterrey, the capital of Spanish California, and word spread a lot more quickly than we might imagine today. The Padres had had plenty of warning. In fact, they had had that order to evacuate and to move all their people, their valuables, their provisions, their livestock overland to another mission site, San Antonio de Pala. But that was 50 miles away on foot, and not 50 miles of easy road, but 50 miles over rough and rugged terrain over the hills. That was never going to happen. That was pretty much never on the table for the Padres here at the mission. And so they made other easier plans, but now that the dastardly pirates had finally arrived, finally landed, they knew the evacuation had to get real. And yet, the two Padres in charge, Father Barona and Father Boscana, still dragged their feet and slow-walked the evacuation. There isn't even anything I could find for the night of the 14th when they knew the pirates were anchored just offshore that indicates any kind of panic or any kind of crazy full evacuation. Nonetheless, though, they knew the pirates were coming, and so ox carts loaded with the mission's valuables and some of the mission's livestock and provisions, and no doubt some of the neophytes, some of the Juanino Indians as they were called, or the Hachaman people, began the evacuation. Now, I've read about this my whole life. Whenever the pirates are mentioned, it's usually only a paragraph. For some reason, it's always treated as sort of a footnote in the mission's history that everybody sort of evacuated to the hills and left. What I did not know until very recently is we know exactly where the people at the mission evacuated to. And it was not 50 miles over the hills to the southeast. It was about 8 miles up the creek from Mission San Juan Capistrano. Now the mission sits on a hill kind of overlooking the Los Rios Historic District down here. There were certainly some buildings up here in front of the modern entrance to the mission on Camino Capistrano today, but most of the town would have been located down there in the Historic District. It only makes sense, right? The mission's up on a hill, a little more fortified, a little more defensible, while the majority of the townsfolk who lived outside the mission, for convenience sake, if nothing else, would have placed their homes with easy access to water near, like I said, what is now called the Los Rios Historic District. As far as I can tell, none of the buildings from 1818 survive down here in the Historic District, with the exception of a few of the adobe buildings built by the mission itself, like this one, the Montanez Adobe, constructed in 1794, one of 40 buildings built to house the mission Indians. But of course, most of them wouldn't have been living in fancy buildings like this. They would have also had like their reed or tool huts. There's a name for those. I can't exactly think of it off the top of my head at this moment, but we'll get back to that. But even this adobe right here just proves the majority of residents were living down in this area, backed up against the creek, which today is not a beautiful, pristine, natural landmark, but more like a concreted up storm channel like the other creeks in Orange County. Nevertheless, it was this sickly looking rivulet that was the main water source for the area. Other than the mission's wells and their little irrigation channels, this would have been the primary source of water for everyone living in the area, especially for their livestock. Now, the mission itself controlled somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 to 15,000 cattle. That's not counting any other kind of livestock or horses. And obviously, they controlled hundreds of miles of land around here, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres. And yet to bring livestock, particularly cattle, to and from the mission, they would have traveled up the side of this creek here, Trabuco Creek, or as they would have just put it, the river, or Arroyo Trabuco, driving cattle up from the country down to the mission, and maybe possibly the beach sometimes, over and over and over again. And in fact, 8 miles up this creek, they had even constructed a little way station, a little mission satellite location for the people in charge of the cattle, a little adobe structure. And this was the Padres' plan of evacuation. Gather all the neophytes, all the Juaninos from the mission, all the mission residents, and anything valuable, the most important valuables from the mission itself, and then take the path along this creek up into the canyons for safety. And so you can just imagine the afternoon or the evening of December 14th, 1818, ox carts laden with church implements or the very most valuable things from the mission, the just-in-case stuff, and any of the especially cautious citizens of the town that wanted to go ahead of time to the pre-planned evacuation site would have been hurrying down here with everything they could carry, with dread and uncertainty, and heading up the path among the oak trees, up into the canyons of the interior. Now these days, to reach the evacuation location, it's not as easy as taking an 8-mile walk up the creek. You have to go around and around and around for miles and miles and miles through anonymous Orange County neighborhoods until eventually you pass through a private golf course and you can pull over on the side of the road here, and just across the street from some of the most anonymous looking South Orange County homes ever, you will find Trabuco Canyon, or one of the canyons along Trabuco Creek, now preserved as part of O'Neill Regional Park and known as, fittingly, the Arroyo Trabuco Wilderness Area. Watch out for mountain lions, and more importantly, watch out for unexploded ordnance. No, I'm not kidding. Apparently, this whole area is littered with old bombs. Regular bombs, and as the sign says, practice bombs. I have no idea why. There were definitely a lot of air bases out here in the area in Orange County during World War II, and then of course we had El Toro and all kinds of bases that are now closed up and long forgotten, so this must have been a practice bombing range at some point. Oof. We must be cautious. Anyway, up there, there's the neighborhood, there's the fancy golf course, and then way down below us is Trabuco Creek itself. And just up here on this rise of ground, you can see exactly why this was a good candidate for like a satellite spot for the mission. Look at this big, broad, flat shelf here before it drops off down into the creek, into the canyon there. Not only did the Spanish think that this would be a good place to camp when they were herding cattle in the area, with nice high dry ground, safe from flooding, and of course the creek there to water as many animals as you could possibly ever need, they found this to be the perfect spot for a more permanent settlement, and we are actually looking at it right now. This right here was the site of the Trabuco Adobe, or as it became known in later years, Rancho Trabuco. Now what we're looking at is a weird little wooden shed with a weird little metal roof with a tiny little porthole inside. You're actually supposed to be able to go through this fence, but it's been padlocked at some point in the last couple years with no sign or explanation why. But what this little hut is protecting is the very last tiny little portion of adobe wall preserved right under this little shed here. That's what the little porthole is for, so you can theoretically peek through and get a glimpse. Most of the photos that we have of the Trabuco Adobe are from the 1930s and 40s when it was a ruin. So no exact floor plan exists that I could find, but this was a pretty massive building, which is why the fence, I don't know if you can really see that, is spread out quite a distance to either side of the little hut we are seeing now. This building was about 60 feet long, about 30 or 40 feet wide. It was a massive structure, and only 8 miles up the creek from the mission, it was the perfect place for the Padres themselves with the most valuable items from the mission to retreat. Now on the first day, on December 14th, the Padres didn't actually leave the mission. They stayed down there and sent, theoretically, some people up ahead here with ox carts, like I said, maybe some of the Juanino Indians, or for the most part, Ahachiman people, I believe is what they were actually called, or what they called themselves, the neophytes of the mission, right? The converts. And this whole area around here would have been full of hundreds of people coming up the canyon that evening to bed down for the night, putting the most valuable items and goods inside of the adobe itself. The Padres themselves stayed behind. They were putting on a brave face. What do we care about a bunch of pirates? We're gonna trust in the will of God, as you would expect from a couple of Spanish Padres down at the mission. But certainly the residents of the town down there in San Juan Capistrano, the neophytes who came with them, and the servants from the mission who were bringing the valuable items up here would have been uncertain, afraid, worried about what in the world these pirates were going to do to their beloved mission, to their town, to their homes, and to their priests. Basically, in mid-December 1818, this whole landscape would have been awash with fear and rumors. Now, as you can see, basically nothing of the Trabuco Adobe itself still stands out here, which is a real shame that it hasn't been reconstructed or restored. This land became a private rancho, no longer the property of the missions after 1830, after secularization. And I mean, you can even see 100 years later in the photos, it had already become a ruin. People had built bigger, better buildings. Maybe just because of the remoteness of the spot, it was never really restored or fixed up or turned into anything. And these days, like I said, it's part of like a wilderness area, part of O'Neill Regional Park, as far as I can tell, sitting right inside the border of Rancho Santa Margarita, which is a very, I would say for the most part, affluent suburb of Orange County. You gotta make a lot of money to live down here. And other than this small shed-like structure with a little peephole inside that's locked off to us today, there is no way. There is really nothing to see these days. Except, of course, for the signs on the building we can't read because we can't get close enough. There's some pretty tiny print to be viewed from this fence over here. And this right here, this historical marker placed here in 1966, dedicated to San Francisco Solano, which is what this spot right here was named by the Portola expedition. That would be the Spanish, quote-unquote, discoverers of the area who camped here on July 24th and 25th, 1769, opening the first overland trail through California. Now, the reason that we know where they camped is because when they set up shop here, they did it because down by the creek was an Ahachiman village site. So just over the edge of the ledge there were all kinds of Native Americans who had their own village going on, plenty of access to water. The Spanish figured they have the Native Americans down there. They've got access to food, to water, but we'll camp up on here on this flat shelf on the hill. We've got a little more space, a little more protection, as it were. Yeah, a little protection from bugs and mosquitoes and things down by the creek as well. And later on, when the mission system came along and gathered up the Native Americans from this region down into the mission and the surrounding area itself, they replaced the Native American village down there with their Rancho Trabuco, or this little adobe way station for livestock, for probably, I'm guessing, you know, for vaqueros, for the cowboys that would take care of them, or the ranch hands, or whatever they were technically called. Now, no doubt, the adobe structure itself was reserved, like I said, for the padres, for the loot, anything valuable that they could have carried here by hand or by ox cart up from the mission. And doubtless plenty of the evacuees camped up there by the adobe itself. But if I were here for easy access to water, I would have made my way down the steep banks of the hills here to the site of that old Native American village. Some of the people fleeing, no doubt, this was the site of the homes of their ancestors. And of course, the source of water, the beautiful Trabuco Creek. Now, I've seen some beautiful natural parts of Trabuco Creek before, up in O'Neill Park, camping up there as a kid. But until recently, when I started investigating Bouchard's raid, I had never heard of the Trabuco Adobe. I didn't know that there was any kind of satellite mission site like that was still around, or at least a tiny fragment was still around. And I certainly didn't know about this. I'm sure the locals know, right? But this well-kept secret here, this little beautiful part of Trabuco Creek down here in the canyons, covered, like thickly covered with all kinds of trees, especially oak trees, and apparently unexploded ordnance from Marine Corps Air Station El Toro. Down here it is all completely overgrown, but you have to imagine that when this was Native American territory and their village was down here, some of this brush would have been burned and cleared away. And what a beautiful landscape to have your sort of reed huts down here. For lack of a better word, I can't remember what they were called. And not only that, you had access to just unlimited amounts of acorns, which the natives in Orange County in this area used to use. They would grind them up, basically turn them into a kind of flour they could make food from. And I'm being careful stomping around here, not just because of the bombs, because some other people walking up the trail warned me that they've seen a couple of rattlesnakes on the trail down here today. But in and among this very flat area down here, to which this trail has been preserved. So, you know, very possibly a contender for the village site. Look at the size of these amazing ancient oak trees. And they have an old man oak tree that they know was there in 1810 down in the Los Rios district by the Mission. So a witness tree to all of the events that we're talking about. This, no doubt, just from the sheer size of it. I mean, that is 4 times as thick as I am right there, that tree. No doubt this tree right here was a witness to the fear, the hushed tones, the livestock being driven up here, the uncertainty, the dread, the fear for their lives from pirates that the refugees would have experienced right here in this area. Now, the other day, by the way, I did go up the creek as far as I could. There's a lot of trails closed off for habitat restoration right here in this particular area. I didn't find any signs of grinding stones out here, but there are rumors that there are some right down here in this area. But then again, with the bomb threat sign and the rattlesnakes, I wasn't drifting too far off the path. And this is incredible. You got to think about this in a different way. Oh, nice little tranquil, weird little niche spot. No, this was the site not only of an original Native American village and then one of the earliest European sort of satellite settlements to the missions, but also a literal refugee camp where people were fleeing from actual pirates 20 or 30 minutes down the freeway from Disneyland. Now that is crazy. Anyway, the Padres sent the first wave of evacuees up here, as far as we can tell, on the night of the 14th. I may be getting some of this timeline wrong. It's not that clearly documented, at least in the sources I was able to pull together, but more would be on the way, and they'd be on the way very soon. The Padres may have stuck it out at the Mission that night, but that wouldn't be the case the next day. The Trabuco Adobe would see even more refugees very soon. Ooh, it's a good shot. Holy moly, it's steeper than I even remembered from the other day. Now back down here on the beach, after Arguello's sassy response, Bouchard met with Peter Corney, his number 2, and all of his officers out there on the ships anchored in San Juan Bay, and came up with their plan of attack. And it was right here on this beach, or well, the beach that was there at the time, that Corney was sent in commanding roughly 140 men, nearly 5 times the mission area's defenders, right? A pretty good force with a couple of cannons even to boot, mobile cannons, field pieces. And just as the sky was beginning to lighten around 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, as Corny's invading pirate force is forming up here on the beach, Arguello, who's up here in the hills with his men, decides to send those of his men who are mounted, right, his cavalry, down to the beach for a show of force. Dude, looking around here today, you would never imagine that this was the actual site of a pirates versus the Spanish battle. People come from all around the world to go just a couple of miles up the freeway to Disneyland to watch the Spanish and the pirates duke it out. But it actually happened right down here at Dana Point, and very probably right in this area of Doheny Beach, which you can see now, it's got like tiki huts and bars and surfers, people peacefully playing volleyball or laying out in their bikinis. But this is where the Spanish defenders decided to make their show of resistance, and all I can think is Peter Corny is down here with 140 guys. Back then, without all the landscaping, the trees, the condominiums, the Costco, they could probably easily see the handful of mounted men the Spanish were sending down to meet them, riding their horses towards them. They must have been thinking, what the heck is this? As a matter of fact, let's listen to Peter Corny's own words. At daylight, we landed about 140 men. The enemy appeared with a body of cavalry, and after firing a few shots, retreated. Now, I'm sure to the Spanish defenders, a handful of them riding down here against a force of 140 guys, 5 times their total force's number, basically, seemed very brave and very bold. But clearly, the Argentinians, who saw this handful of madmen coming down at them, fire off a few shots, pepper a few balls into the air, and then speed off, were not impressed, nor were they deterred. Pirates were officially on the ground in the future Orange County, and they were on a mission to raid the Mission. In 1818 terms, they did not have far to go, just 3 miles or so up the creek, up the El Camino Real, the King's Highway. The Spanish were in absolutely no position to defend the Mission or its stores, and the pirates knew it. The only question was, what were they going to find when they got there? Well, anyway, it had finally happened. The skirmish between the Spanish and the pirates were on their way. Arguello's men made their way back up to the Mission to give a final warning to any stragglers left behind, who immediately evacuated up Trabuco Creek with the rest of the Mission population. With a force so small, Arguello wisely decided that rather than staying and actually defending the Mission walls themselves, his men would retreat on top of a nearby hill where they could keep an eye on the pirates and what they did without being, absolutely massacred. Now, it took a while for the pirates to get organized and march themselves the 2 or 3 miles up Camino Capistrano to the Mission itself, but come they did, and by 10 a.m. they had reached the Mission itself with 140 guys, plus 2 field pieces, the 2 cannons, one of which they set up right in the middle of the El Camino Real, pointing up at the hill up towards Arguello's men, and the other inside of the Mission walls on top of a pile of rubble here in front of the old ruined stone church, pointed back down towards the town, just in case they met any resistance from that quarter. Now, the great stone church back then, as it is today, is the biggest landmark here. So this is where the pirates assembled. This is where they placed their cannon on top of the massive pile of rubble from when the Great Stone Church fell down in 1812 during an earthquake. And it's so peaceful and beautiful and scenic out here these days, it's hard to imagine. But in 1818, Peter Corny and 140 of his men, well, really Bouchard's men, who were comprised of people from all over the world, like I said, Filipinos and native Hawaiians, Europeans, Creoles, Frenchmen, Spaniards, armed to the teeth, stir crazy from so many weeks aboard, and probably a little PO'd from Arguello's sassy reply to their demands, not to mention the little attack on the beach that morning, were right here, gathered in front of the old stone church, ready to do some raiding, and that's exactly what they did. Now, Bouchard had warned them, just as he had in Monterey, to leave the church alone, which was not the giant stone chapel here that had already fallen down, like I said, but the smaller original chapel that's still here, the Serra Chapel. He knew that if he was going to get the local Californios to rebel against Spain, it was probably not a good idea to attack the actual church sanctuaries themselves. And in fact, he warned the men not to touch the Serra Chapel on pain of death. But other than that, of course, they were not only free to, but ordered to pillage, plunder, rifle, and loot the Mission for anything they could find. And if they were lucky, even drink up me hearties, yo ho. Now, one of the first buildings they encountered was, of course, the soldiers' barracks. And keep in mind, there was no time to lose, no time to waste. So immediately this place was overrun by crazy, hungry, bloodthirsty pirates. And anything that was left behind in terms of weapons, clothing, or personal items were snatched up quicker than you can say Junipero Serra. Now, the Padres had actually locked up the Mission, and by that I mean locked all the doors behind behind them. But the pirates simply took their guns, blasted off the locks, and made their way into every room in the facility. Again, grabbing anything left behind. And by the way, this includes even the Padres' quarters. Even the priests were not safe here. Looking around today, you can see a lot of wear and tear and damage and repairs on those doors over the years. Makes me wonder if any of that could be original pirate damage. Probably not, but I could dream. Now by this point, like I had mentioned, the Padres and everybody else at the mission had fled with everything they could carry, anything of value. So by the time the pirates got here, they were finding mostly just empty shells, furniture, maybe some clothing scattered around, which only fueled their fire, added to the rage and their determination to break into every room to find something, anything of value here. Broke into the Padres' quarters. No doubt they broke into the church, but didn't touch it. They broke into the kitchens, the storerooms, and eventually the West Wing, the warehouses. And this is where the pirate story levels up. Now today, the warehouses have on display some of the mission's treasures, which we should actually go inside and take a look at right quick in the middle of our story. These are some of the things that the pirates were after, but the fathers had already removed up Trabuco Canyon and to safety. Literally, these items here were up at that refugee camp. Got quite a bit of silver here to somebody living in 1818, including this silver crucifix with a bullet hole in it, but that's a story for another time. These very items were the ones removed from the mission by the fathers, by the people who lived here fleeing for safety, and kept free from the taint of pirate hands. Bouchard and his men, even though they were supposed to leave the church alone, I'd imagine if they found these things, they would have taken them. It's crazy to think of these exact pieces being taken up Trabuco Canyon, up to the Trabuco Adobe. They were probably housed inside, and although I'm sure there were a few other treasures, a few other pieces, some silver plates and things like that, and obviously a little bit of cash on hand at the mission, there wasn't as much in terms of gold and silver church adornments as you would think there was, because what little came over from Spain was largely put into the big stone church. And after the earthquake in 1812, I read that most of that stuff was stored safely down in San Diego at the bigger church and with the Presidio and all that kind of stuff until the big stone church here could be rebuilt, which sadly it never was. Anyway, there were no mission treasures in here when the pirates got here. In the original warehouses standing at that time, all they would have found was more barley, wheat, grain, whatever was being grown out here. Dried corn, dried beef, food. In fact, Peter Corney said they found this place well stocked with everything but money. And he meant everything. At least everything a pirate could wish for. Because in addition to the cowhides, to the corn, to the wheat, to the seed, and the feed, the original warehouses right here, storehouses, had two wings projecting out behind them, which sadly, if we come around the back of the modern reconstructed building today, you'll see they no longer stand out here. But these two extensions are where the mission stored the liquids. That would include olive oil, but also wine and brandy, as perhaps the fathers would have referred to it as. The pirates thought it tasted more like gin. It was actually something called aguardiente, something local that was brewed up here, probably made from the mission grapes as well. It was kind of like brandy, but a little bit more like moonshine. And this, of course, is where the pirates lost their mind, smashing up all the very heavy barrels, so heavy and huge that, of course, the Spanish themselves couldn't carry them away up Trabuco Creek, stuck their mouths to the holes, presumably, and just started imbibing and having a good old time. Literally, so much wine and so much gin, as they called it, was spilled all over the floors. There are stories about people getting down on all fours and drinking it up from the floor, where it was obviously running down into this basement that probably would have had the big wine cask in it. That's just speculation on my part. I've never seen drawings or anything. They might have been drinking hooch off of that very floor right down there, and possibly even right underneath where I'm standing, because we're standing on another one of those extensions, little platforms here, right? The foundation. So this is where the mission basements were. 140 guys running riot all over here, finding nothing but corn and food, meat, which of course is good, but not great if you're a pirate in search of gold, booty, etc., etc. I mean, there weren't even any women around inside of the mission when they got here. Thank God, of course. But finally, they had found hooch, and these guys began to get hammered. And I'm talking super hammered. And the more drunk they got, and the less they found in the mission to carry away with them to their ships, the more angry we got. And that's when they began going back through all the mission buildings and smashing up all the furniture, piling it up, and lighting fire to it. Now, most of the mission's buildings were built out of adobe and had these sort of clay or ceramic tiled roofs, just like the ones you see up here today. So most of them were basically fireproof. So in terms of burning the mission down, that wasn't really possible, at least for the bulk of the buildings out here. Plus, they were told on pain of death not to risk the Sarah Chapel, right? However, unlike the Sarah Chapel, which is located right in front of us, or the Padres quarters over here, built out of adobe with those tile roofs, the soldiers' barracks had a wooden roof, and those were in fact burnt up. Now, clearly the barracks were eventually rebuilt, but this is at least one structure here we know for sure was burned by pirates. So picture it, you've got 140 men from all over the world, all different backgrounds, running around here like crazy, drunk as a skunk, rioting through the rooms, through the hallways, drunk and disorderly, and now they're setting fire to buildings just like in Pirates of the Caribbean. I just came back into the barracks to see if I could see any evidence of damage from said fire, but I don't see any. You see a very modern roof up there, and who knows? I mean, even if they repaired this in 1819, it would look old to us now. Absolutely amazing. These guys were now running riot all over the mission, smashing stuff, grabbing anything they could take, smashing furniture, burning anything else they couldn't take. And in fact, apparently, Peter Corney and the officers had a hard time getting these drunken, wild men to focus on gathering up what they could take. But it wasn't just here inside of the mission that all this was going on, because let's not forget about the surrounding town. And actually the whole surrounding area was full of mission buildings back then. It wasn't just what we have preserved here today. As you notice, as we're walking around inside the mission, we haven't talked at all about where the neophytes, the Ahachiman, the Juanino Indians were living. Their dwellings were spread out all over the place here. You would have had the plaza in front of the mission with some of the Spanish buildings, more down in the Los Ríos Historic District, some of them adobe, but most of them jacales, kind of a mix of mud and reeds, sort of similar to adobe, built around twigs and poles, typically with thatched roofs and incredibly flammable. So the pirates had now spread out all over the surrounding town, looting everybody's homes, taking their possessions, even those meager possessions held by the Indians, smashing their furniture, stealing, burning, taking their clothes and burning their houses down, as well as the houses of the Americans, as they called them, meaning the Spanish European residents living here outside of the mission. And the story goes that while some of the mission buildings in the town of San Juan Capistrano were burning up and the smoke was rising into the sky, drunken pirates were wildly ringing the bells of San Juan Capistrano. It was absolute, pure, and total mayhem down here. It's hard to tell today because the view down the canyon is obscured by trees, but no doubt, sitting up here at the Trabuco Adobe, the refugees, the 1,000 refugees from the mission, would have seen the smoke rising from 8 miles down the canyon in San Juan Capistrano. You can only imagine how much more dread and fear came upon everybody camped up here when they realized that not just their homes and their property, their stores, their food, any animals or furniture that had been left behind were possibly being destroyed, but also, for all they knew, maybe even the mission itself, maybe even their holy church. And let's not forget, they would have considered it very holy, very sacred. The destruction of the church would potentially be just as traumatic to all of the people staying up here as any of their actual household property itself. They had to make that absolutely wild scramble up here from the mission, 8 miles to these hills just to see smoke rising from down below over their backs, and then spend the rest of the afternoon and the night up here huddled in fear with whispers and rumors potentially from runners about what was going on below. You know, if these canyon walls could talk, I think they'd tell quite a story from the refugees' point of view that day as well. Now here alongside the mission, outside its walls, is the historic El Camino Real, the main highway that went down to San Diego. Remember, the pirates had one gun on the ruins of the stone church pointed down at the town, and another gun right here in the middle of El Camino Real pointed up at the nearby hill where Arguello and the Spanish defenders and the scattered reinforcements that were joining them were camped out looking down on the mission and the mayhem. Now obviously now we have all kinds of buildings in the way, but there's a couple of hills here. One you can kind of see there just south of the mission rising up, but if we turn the corner here, another one directly east of the mission across what is now the 5 freeway that's pretty obscured by these trees, probably a little easier to see from the air. And according to the Spanish accounts, that's where Arguello's men were sitting up there looking down at the mission. By the way, look at this on this street right here. Look at the size of this old tree. What is that, a pepper tree? That is absolutely freaking massive. That thing is wider than a Volkswagen. Look at the size of this thing. It's even full of concrete to reinforce it. Don't tell me that tree wasn't here looking down at the destruction of the mission as well. Well, anyway, Arguello's men would have been looking down at the mission, reinforcements starting to arrive from the surrounding hills and up from San Diego, as Bouchard's men, after smashing and burning and drinking everything they could in the mission, were finally being rounded up by Peter Corney and the officers to carry whatever they could back down to the beach, back down to the ships. And this is where the story gets a little more interesting, but rather than use my own words, let me read you what Peter Corney himself had to say about this raid. The Commodore, that's Bouchard, ordered me to land and bring him a sample of the powder and shot, which I accordingly did with a party of 140 men, well armed, with 2 field pieces. On our landing, a party of horsemen came down and fired a few shots at us and ran towards the town. They made no stand, and soon we occupied the place. After breakfast, the people commenced plundering. We found the town well stocked with everything but money, and destroyed much wine and spirits and all the public property, set fire to the king's stores, barracks, and governor's house, so probably the Padre's house, or at least they might have thought so. And about 2 o'clock, we marched back, although not in the order we went. Many of the men being intoxicated, and some were so much so that we had to lash them onto the field pieces and drag them to the beach, where about 6 o'clock, we arrived with the loss of 6 men. Next morning, we punished about 20 men for getting drunk. What that means, lashing them to the field pieces, is that some of these pirates were so drunk they literally had to tie them to the cannons as they dragged them back down to the beach. And a good chunk of the men, 20 of them at least, were flogged quite zestily for getting so drunk that they were absolutely useless. Now, when they actually left the mission and the town here up on the hill in San Juan Capistrano, these men were supposed to take back all the food, the leather, the guns, the furniture, whatever little money or valuables or personal portable property they could find, and carry it back down this road, Camino Capistrano, to the beach. I remember these guys were a drunk and disorderly bunch. They may have been afraid of their commanders and started in somewhat of an order. But like Corney said, that order absolutely broke down on the march to the sea, because all along the way, these drunk and tired men, with their bellies full of the mission's meat and wine, apparently just began to drop all their plunder and start ditching it along the roadside. So when they finally did get back to the beach and back to the ships, they had more or less got nothing. Now, Corney said they arrived missing only 6 men. Nobody was killed, either on the pirate side or on the Spanish defender side in the actual raid of the mission. But as the pirates left towards the beach and Arguello's men made their way down into the mission proper, they found 4 of Bouchard's men hiding out in the mission itself. Apparently, they were tired of the pirate life, tired of being underfed and underpaid, tired of risking their life on raids and revolutions that had nothing to do with them. So they decided to surrender and claim that they were forced into being a part of Bouchard's crew, which is entirely possible. Now, I don't know how much you've read about 18th and early 19th century mariners, but whether you're talking about Captain James Cook's crew and any of them trying to run away on islands in the Pacific, or actual well-trained naval crews of various nations, captains of those ships did not just let the men go, right? They would hold whole islands hostage if they had to, and threaten to burn and kill everyone until their men were returned. And down on the beach, away at anchor, that's exactly what Bouchard was now considering. What the heck, we're missing 4 guys? But as the Spanish took control once again of the mission property, or took possession of it, and tried to quench the flames of the recent raid, Bouchard was lying out there in the ocean, contemplating. Now, apparently the next morning, the Padres up in Trabuco Canyon had had enough and started making their way back down to the mission with a whole train of neophytes in tow. The Spanish defenders met them and said, "What are you doing? Bouchard is still out there lying at anchor. Get the heck back up into the canyon." So off they went back up to the Trabuco Adobe, and Arguello's men, now more heavily reinforced by all the ranchers in the surrounding area, some up from near Los Angeles, some from down by San Diego, some of the soldiers, were here at the mission to receive Bouchard's threats that if the 4 men were not returned to his ship, they would come back and burn up the Sarah Chapel. Well, as you can see here, the Sarah Chapel is still very much intact, with its beautiful altar that was brought all the way from Spain. So that is not what happened. I don't know if the Spanish defenders made any kind of reply back to Bouchard. He must have had some spies or runners or seen enough guys, Spanish guys that is, down on the beach that he realized they were in much better shape to put up some resistance than they had been over the last couple of days. And Bouchard, as inept as he was at fomenting revolution, was no idiot, right? He knew if I send all my guys back up there, it's just as likely I'm going to lose even more men than the 4. And so finally, at the end of that day, Bouchard and his pirates, probably disgusted by failure, and some of them very sore from being flogged, set sail southwards and away from the California coast. Or at least what is now the California coast up here in the United States. Now, I mentioned that none of the Spanish defenders and none of the pirates were killed down here at the mission, as far as we can tell from the records. However, by the time the Padres actually got back here the next day, when Bouchard had left and all had seemed secure, and by the way, the Spanish defenders were back in the mission, they made a grisly discovery. 2 of the Native American neophytes, 2 of the Ahachiman people that were here, had at some point made their way inside the unsecured mission and discovered the unlocked warehouses and the basement awash with liquor. One at a time or separately, we don't really know. They got down here and were drinking some of the liquor pooled up in the basement. I was told that they laid down on the ground and just drank their fill. And keep in mind, like many other Native American peoples, they really had no native liquor, right? They didn't have a lot of resistance or a big tolerance for liquor, and working and living here at the mission, they would have never had access to the wine or the aguardiente, which, like I said, was a lot more like moonshine. That was strong stuff. And so sadly, they drank themselves to death. This is something the Padres were pretty furious about and blamed the Spanish defender, Arguello, and his men. What the hello, operator, is wrong with you guys? You're supposed to watch the mission. This could have never happened. Arguello's men are like, dude, there was nobody in there when we went and secured the mission. They must have come back with you. We don't know when this happened. Actually, in the aftermath of the whole thing, there was a big contention. The defenders blamed the Padres for not giving them more men or Indians to defend the mission or horses. The Padres thought, obviously, the defenders didn't do enough. They didn't put up any real show of resistance. So they blamed them for a lot of the pillaging, the looting, and the burning, and such like. But that's politics, right? That's the way that it goes. I couldn't find the name of the second man who died, who sadly drank himself to death in the aftermath. One of them's name was Shaqual, apparently, in the Ahachiman. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that. In Spanish, his baptism name was Onofre. Apparently he was married. Some people say his widow was so sad, she died as well of a broken heart. And so between the stress and the alcohol and the sadness, there were a few casualties of the battle. Well, battle is stretching it a little bit. Of the raid. On the mission side, on the pirate side, there were 4 casualties. Casualties doesn't mean death, right? It means missing, captured, or wounded as well. And actually, we don't know if those guys really hid out to try to defect, or if they got so drunk they couldn't leave, and then when they got caught in here, maybe they made that as an excuse. And look at this place, it's gorgeous. It's Orange County, California. I'd want to stay too. Well, apparently, they ended up being prisoners and kind of forced into labor around here in Orange County for the rest of their lives and in Los Angeles, and all more or less came to kind of nothing deaths later on. And the crazy thing about the whole story, about the entire pirate raid, about Bouchard's entire quest up and down the West Coast, is that even though it was completely ineffective, it was just 3 years later that Mexico declared its independence from Spain, and revolution did indeed come to the California coast, including Mission San Juan Capistrano, which was then secularized another couple years after that, under Mexican Governor Jose Figueroa. If I am remembering correctly, San Juan Capistrano was secularized as well. All of the mission properties, all of its lands became part of Mexican California's rancho system, and the Padres no longer had control here at the mission or in Orange County. And that, my friends, is the end of the story of the pirate raid on Mission San Juan Capistrano. A highly ineffective, strange tale of a Frenchman flying the flag of Argentina with a crew of weird, motley pirates from all over the world who came to loot, burn, and steal, and basically, in the grand scheme of things, achieved absolutely nothing, including the fact that people rarely ever tell this tale, like I said, other than a footnote maybe, or one small paragraph in a book about the missions. And even then, Monterey gets most of the screen time, right? Because that's where most of the action happened. Even as popular as pirates are here in Orange County, thanks to Disneyland and the Pirates of the Caribbean, and as popular as the missions are on field trips and in elementary school classes, much less with the bougie people who like to shop in San Juan Capistrano or come out here for a day trip, and of course all the brides that love to take their wedding photos down here, it is still rarely ever mentioned. Now, did God protect the chapel, the Sarah Chapel here, where Father Sarah himself, Saint Sarah himself, served the Mass? I can't say. What I do notice, and I'm just saying, I'm not a Catholic or anything, a Roman Catholic. The church is still here, but the mission was not long for the earth. So perhaps if providence was involved, the faith was preserved, the forced labor, and some would say forced conversions, were put to an end. One thing before we start to wrap up this particular adventure, this was the site of the original Mission Cemetery. Most of the bodies were taken from here and reinterred, potentially up on the hill that Arguello and his men were sitting on watching the mission burn. This cross here was erected in 1924, and it says at the bottom, "In this holy place lie the bodies of those who built the mission. May their souls rest in peace." Like I say, most of the thousands of bodies that were buried here were reinterred a little farther away in the Mission Cemetery, but not all. And so perhaps under our feet still lie the bodies of some of those people who had to flee up to Trabuco Canyon, and perhaps even the two men who sadly drank themselves to death in the aftermath here at the mission. And so that's it. That's the story of the real-life pirate raid on Orange County. So the next time you go to Disneyland, remember that just 18 miles south is the site of an actual pirate raid on Orange County, the site of which you can actually visit yourself today. Now, just a couple of quick notes. Bear with me. Before we go, most of the sources I got a hold of disagree on the dates, right? Was the pirate raid on the 14th, or was it on the 15th, or was it on the 16th? Some of the primary sources are not exactly clear. Even back then, I mean, you read Peter Corney's account of the whole incident. It was barely a paragraph. The surviving mission records and things are much the same. It's a very brief footnote in the history of the mission, although maybe there were other accounts that we have since lost. Well, at the very end of doing several days worth of research and reading for this video, in fact, after filming 2/3 of it, I came across probably the best research on this subject, the form of an article by public school teacher and historian Eric Plunkett, who runs a blog called Visions of California that I had never heard of. I just never stumbled across it before. So I'm almost done with all of this, and then I come across this incredible blog where Eric, with a lot of assistance from other historians, went into all the primary sources and came up with probably the most complete article and most extensive article about the pirate raid and some of the details, and probably more correct dating than I used here. He had another post all about Trabuco Canyon and the Adobe up there. I will link both down below in the description. I wish I had came across them at the beginning of my research instead of the end. I was mostly going through all the books I could find in the library, which were not nearly as detailed. And hey, maybe if we're lucky, we'll get to meet up with Eric Plunkett sometime and pick his brain about some other Orange County history things. Now, just a couple of other things before I let you go. As you probably figured, this is the kind of video that takes more than just 24 hours to turn around. As much as YouTube, our chosen platform, punishes you for it, this is the kind of thing that takes days and days of reading and research, and then multiple days to film and multiple days to edit. It is hardly the kind of content that is generally rewarded by YouTube or paid for by ads, which is why I just want to make a special shout out, and I very rarely ever do this, to our Patreon members that make all the Random Land episodes possible, and possible to be on free platforms like YouTube, but also especially make more detailed investigations into history possible, such as this very mission to uncover the story of the pirate raid on Mission San Juan Capistrano. So if you enjoy these type of videos and you'd like to see more of them, especially coming from me, please consider joining our patrons over there on Patreon. We have special little update videos from time to time, as well as podcasts. It's more like a giant tip hat, though, just to keep the show going. This way I can focus all my energy on Random Land and not be running around trying to figure out what little thing to lure people into Patreon for, right? And no one's holding a gun to anyone's head, unlike those dastardly pirates that were down here at the mission. But if you've got anything to spare and you'd like to help out the cause, that's where you can donate, help keep me on the road, help keep content like this alive on the internet. You can also visit our merch store, which has some brand new stuff in it and even more on the way. Hats, books, the best freaking hot sauce you've ever had in your life, car magnets, stickers, and any day now, a brand new pin. As well as, hold on with me, I'm almost done, as well as the most important thing of all, you could share this episode with your friends that you think might like this one or any of our other adventures here in Random land. All right, you like that? I'm done now, okay? It's a pretty long video. I think you could stand a little bit of a sales pitch at the end. Had an absolute blast digging into this. Want to look into all kinds of other Southern California history when I get back from my road trip adventures this summer. So I'm looking forward to seeing all of you back here in Random Land. But for now, like the Padres and like the Pirates, we've done our duty. It's time to go home and sleep well. On the other side of the Mission Barracks, which is now used for classroom presentations. They were just having a lecture in here actually about pollinators and butterflies and bees for Earth Day. Definitely see the roof was rebuilt, but no evidence of the burning or destruction. The Padres rebuilt well, I guess. Side note here, really quick, down here on Doheny State Beach or whatever it's called, down in Dana Point, right where Bouchard and his men were laying off the coast, right where they rowed up to attack the mission and then of course return to their boats with what meager supplies they did bring back. There is absolutely no marker that I can find, no plaque, no nothing. You'd figure there'd be a freaking statue of Bouchard out here. I mean, he was a freaking pirate. There's no evidence Bouchard himself came ashore, but Peter Corney and the rest of the gang, they came up right onto this beach. Dude, if I was in charge of Dana Point, and I said I am certainly not, I would have definitely put some kind of monument, some kind of plaque. Freaking pirates. Anyway, now there are legends, my friends. Legends about all the supplies that the pirates left scattered along the road back down to the beach. Legend that they did drop valuables and candlesticks and things like that along their path. So I guess it's theoretically possible that there is some sacked mission treasure buried along the roadside or along the creek or maybe even washed out here into the bay. And there's even stronger local legends and local folklore about what the Padres left up at the Trabuco Adobe and in Trabuco Canyon. We'll have to save that for another time. Anyway, this is where they came, right here, to row back to their ship. Just trying to imagine Bouchard's face when all his men start climbing back aboard the boats, totally drunk with barely anything to show for themselves. He was probably not a very happy camper out there, that is for sure. Yo ho, a pirate's life for me. That Bouchard was a really weird guy. They didn't give much, but they didn't give a hoot once they broke into the hooge. Oh, yo, ho, yo, oh. The pirates were here doing things. No pirates now, just a bunch of people surfing and playing volleyball, playing hooky. Maybe tiddlywinks, I don't know what people are doing. No more kidnapping, ravaging. I guess people give a hoot now. Look at all the lifeguards. Bouchard could have never seen it coming. Whoa.